1942, a memo circulates through RAF Command. It's titled Operational Assessment, Female Ferry Pilots. The conclusion is unambiguous. Women can deliver aircraft, yes, but only under perfect conditions. Clear skies, safe routes, no pressure. The memo states explicitly what every RAF officer already believes. Women lack the nerves for combat flying. They'll panic under fire. They don't have the steel, the instinct, the discipline to handle a fighter plane when hell breaks loose. But there's another message embedded in that memo. A belief the RAF Command holds as scientific fact. Women are physiologically incapable of handling high-stress aerial combat. Their bodies can't take the G-forces. Their minds freeze under pressure. They're useful for moving planes from point A to point B, sure, but put them in real danger? They'll crack. The Royal Air Force had built their entire air transport auxiliary program on this assumption. Women could ferry trainers, light aircraft, maybe even bombers on quiet days. But fighters? Combat scenarios? Life or death decisions at 300 miles per hour? That required a man. The RAF believed this so deeply that when they assigned women to deliver Spitfires to frontline squadrons, they gave one critical instruction: avoid danger at all costs. If there's enemy activity, land immediately. If conditions deteriorate, abort the mission. Don't take risks. You're not built for it. But then one woman, an ATA pilot named Mary Ellis, climbed into a Spitfire cockpit just as German bombers appeared on the horizon. Ground crews screamed at her to get out, take cover, wait for the all-clear. She throttled up and took off straight into the raid. What happened in the next 47 minutes shattered every assumption the RAF held about women, fighters, and who could handle pressure when death filled the sky. No weapons, no escort, no radio contact. Just her, a Spitfire, and a sky exploding with flak and Luftwaffe fighters hunting for targets. When she landed at the coastal base, Spitfire intact, mission complete, even the hardest RAF veterans went silent. This is a story that's been buried for 80 years. If you want to see more forgotten women's history like this, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Let's make sure these stories don't stay forgotten. This is how institutional sexism met undeniable proof in the worst possible way for the doubters. How RAF commanders who dismissed women as fragile watched one unarmed pilot do what half their veteran squadron couldn't: fly through an active air raid and land without a scratch. How women fighting for recognition in a country that wouldn't let them fight proved their worth not with words, but with wings. This is the story of the Air Transport Auxiliary, women who flew without guns, without glory, and without fear. And it starts with understanding exactly what the RAF believed about women, war, and who deserved to be called a pilot. To understand what happened when Mary Ellis took off into that air raid, you first need to understand what the RAF believed about women and flying. The Royal Air Force in World War II wasn't just protecting tradition, they were protecting what they saw as biological reality. A reality where women simply could not handle the physical and mental demands of combat aviation. This wasn't subtle. It was official institutional policy. RAF training manuals, medical assessments, and command memos all reinforce the same message. Women were auxiliaries, assistants, support, never combatants, never in danger, never trusted with real responsibility when lives hung in the balance. At the core of this ideology was a gender hierarchy that ranked capability. Men, especially officers, especially fighter pilots, at the apex. Below them, enlisted men, ground crew, support staff. And at the very bottom, women who wanted to fly. The RAF saw women as useful in wartime, yes, but only in controlled environments. Ferry a plane on a sunny day from a factory to a base? Fine, but put a woman in a deteriorating tactical situation? Absolutely not. This wasn't just prejudice. It was pseudoscientific sexism codified into military doctrine. RAF flight surgeons published studies claiming women's bodies couldn't handle sustained forces. Training officers stated publicly that women lacked situational awareness under stress. Commanding officers told Parliament that letting women fly combat missions would be a waste of aircraft and a risk to national security. Women pilots, they were specifically told, were competent, but only within limits. Push them past those limits, and they'd fold. The Air Transport Auxiliary was created with these assumptions baked in. Women could help, but they'd never be pilots in the truest sense. Not the way men were. And then the war got desperate enough that assumptions met reality. And reality had a Spitfire engine and a woman who refused to land. Britain, 1940. The nation is hemorrhaging pilots faster than it can train replacements. The Battle of Britain has just ended. The RAF technically won. The Luftwaffe failed to achieve air superiority. The invasion never came. But the cost is staggering. 544 RAF aircrew killed in action. Hundreds more wounded, burned, psychologically shattered. And this is just the beginning. The war is expanding. Bomber Command needs crews. Fighter squadrons need constant reinforcement. Coastal patrols, reconnaissance, air-sea rescue. Every branch is screaming for pilots. But there's another crisis nobody's talking about publicly: aircraft distribution. Factories across Britain are producing fighters and bombers at unprecedented rates. Spitfires rolling off assembly lines in Castle Bromwich, Hurricanes from Hawker, Lancasters, Wellingtons, Mosquitoes, hundreds of aircraft per month. But someone has to move them, from factory to maintenance unit, from maintenance unit to operational squadron, from the repair facility back to the front lines. Before the war, this wasn't a problem. RAF pilots flew their own aircraft to their postings. But now, RAF pilots are too valuable, too desperately needed in combat roles to waste time on ferry duty. The solution seems obvious. Create a civilian ferry service. The Air Transport Auxiliary was born in 1940 with one simple mandate: move aircraft so combat pilots don't have to. At first, it's exclusively male. Former RAF pilots too old for combat. Civilian aviators with flying experience. Even a few volunteers from abroad. But the numbers don't add up. There aren't enough qualified male pilots who aren't already in uniform. The backlog grows. Newly manufactured Spitfires sit at factories while squadrons operate under strength at the front. Then someone suggests the unthinkable. Use women. The pushback is immediate and institutional. Air Chief Marshal Sir Trafford Mallory speaks for many when he tells the Air Ministry, women may have their place in this war, but it is not in the cockpit of a fighting aeroplane. He's not talking about combat. Women aren't being considered for that. He's talking about simply moving fighters from one airfield to another. The concern, as stated in official memos, is that women lack the physical strength to handle high-performance aircraft. The Hurricane and Spitfire have heavy controls. No power steering, no hydraulic assistance in early models. It takes upper body strength to muscle them through maneuvers. There's also the technical argument. Fighters are complicated machines. Multiple fuel tanks to manage, trim settings, propeller pitch, supercharger controls. The RAF doubts women have the mechanical aptitude to master different aircraft types quickly. And then there's the unspoken concern, the one that appears in private correspondence but never official reports: propriety. A woman alone, flying a fighter, staying overnight at RAF bases, working shoulder to shoulder with male ground crews and mechanics? It's unseemly. It's inappropriate. It's not how respectable women behave. But desperation overrides decorum. In January 1940, 8 women were accepted into the Air Transport Auxiliary on a probationary basis. The conditions are explicit. They'll fly only basic training aircraft. Tiger Moths, Magisters. Simple, slow, safe. The women accept. They have no choice. It's this or nothing. Diary entry, Lettuce Curtis, February 1940. They watch us like we're circus animals performing tricks. Every landing is scrutinized. Every flight log was examined for errors. The men are allowed mistakes. They're learning the ropes. When we make mistakes, it's proof that women can't cut it. The training is identical to what male ATA pilots receive, but the atmosphere is completely different. Male pilots are given the benefit of the doubt. Women have to prove themselves on every single flight. Flight engineer Reg Borman recalls, "The joke around the hangar was "atta girls," as in, "atta girl, you didn't crash it." Every time one of the women landed, blokes would clap sarcastically, like she'd done something miraculous just by not dying. The women study aircraft technical manuals late into the night. They memorize cockpit layouts, performance specifications, emergency procedures for aircraft they're not even cleared to fly yet. They practice takeoffs and landings until their arms ache from controlling heavy aircraft. And they endure, because they know something the RAF doesn't want to admit. The service needs them. By late 1941, the female ATA pilots had proven reliable enough that restrictions started to ease. They're cleared for bigger aircraft, heavier bombers, and eventually, grudgingly, fighters. Not because the RAF's opinion of women has changed, but because there's a war to win and planes must be moved. The institutional bias doesn't disappear. It just goes underground, simmering beneath official policy. Women can fly Spitfires now, but only in perfect conditions, only on safe routes, only when there's no danger. The RAF still believes women will break under real pressure. That belief is about to be tested at 8,000 feet, with flak bursting and Messerschmitts circling. Her name is Mary Ellis, and she's been obsessed with flying since she was 7 years old. Not the idea of flying, not the romance of it. The actual mechanical reality, the physics of lift, the relationship between throttle and airspeed, the way an aircraft responds when you understand it completely. She grew up on a farm in Oxfordshire, the daughter of a garage owner who taught her to rebuild engines before she was tall enough to see over the workbench. While other girls her age were learning embroidery, Mary was learning compression ratios. At 15, she saw her first aircraft up close, a de Havilland Moth that made an emergency landing in a nearby field. While the farmer who owned the land yelled at the pilot for damaging his crops, Mary circled the aircraft, studying the control surfaces, the wing structure, and the way the whole machine was built for one purpose, defying gravity. The pilot, an RAF reserve officer, noticed her interest. "You like aeroplanes, girl?" "I want to fly one," Mary said. He laughed. Not cruelly, but dismissively. "Women don't fly, love. Not like this." She took her first flying lesson 6 months later, paying for it with money saved from working at her father's garage. By 1938, she had her pilot's license. By 1940, she had over 400 hours of flight time, more than some RAF pilots entering combat. When the Air Transport Auxiliary began accepting women, Mary applied immediately. Diary entry, Mary Ellis, January 1940. The interviewing officer asked me why I wanted to join. I told him, "Because I can fly, and you need pilots." He smiled like I'd said something charming. "We need ferry pilots, Miss Ellis, not pilots." As if there's a difference. As if moving a Spitfire requires less skill than fighting in one. She was accepted, but on probation. Always on probation. What drives Mary isn't just love of flying. It's the burning need to prove that competence has no gender. Every flight is an audition. Every landing is scrutinized. One mistake, and it won't be Mary Ellis made an error. It'll be women can't handle aircraft. She carries that weight every time she climbs into a cockpit. Letter to her sister, March 1941. The worst part isn't the men who openly dismiss us. It's the ones who are kind about it. The ones who pat your shoulder and say, "You're doing awfully well for a girl," like I'm a child who tied her shoes correctly. I don't want encouragement. I want to be judged by the same standard as every male pilot here, and then exceed it. But even exceeding the standard isn't enough. When Mary completes a flawless delivery of a Wellington bomber through deteriorating weather, her flight log is praised as exceptional for an ATA pilot, with the unspoken qualifier hanging in the air for a woman. When a male pilot makes the same flight, he's just doing his job. The isolation is constant and exhausting. She's not fully accepted by the male pilots, many of whom still see the women as temporary wartime novelties. And she's not fully understood by civilians who think women in the ATA are just flying secretaries moving paperwork. Even some of the other female pilots think Mary pushes too hard, takes unnecessary risks to prove points that don't need proving. Conversation with fellow ATA pilot Pauline Gower, recorded in interview, 1985. Pauline told me, "Mary, you don't have to be perfect every single time. You're allowed to be human." But that was exactly wrong. I wasn't allowed to be human. Humans mean mistakes, and women's mistakes get remembered. I had to be perfect, or I was proving every doubter right. Mary flies with a leather-bound notebook in her flight jacket. In it, she records every aircraft she's flown, type, date, conditions, quirks of that particular plane. Spitfire Mech V, factory fresh, heavy on the left aileron. Hurricane Mech AU-2, engine runs hot. Watch the temp gauge. Wellington IC, sluggish rudder response, compensate in crosswinds. She studies these notes between flights, memorizing details that might save her life or prove her competence when it matters most. She doesn't want glory. She wants respect. The respect that comes from being seen as a pilot, full stop. Not a female pilot. Not a novelty. A professional doing a dangerous job at the highest level. But respect, Mary is learning, isn't given freely to women. It has to be taken. And sometimes it has to be proven under conditions that would break most men. Final diary entry before the flight that will define her legacy. June 1942. Tomorrow I'm delivering a Spitfire to Biggin Hill. Factory to frontline squadron. Straightforward run, weather permitting. I've done this route a dozen times, but every flight feels like a test. Maybe one day it won't. Maybe one day I'll just be a pilot doing a job. But not yet. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm still proving I deserve to be here. She had no idea how much proving she was about to do. June 18, 1942. 600 hours. Castle Bromwich Aircraft Factory, Birmingham. Mary's assignment arrives on the morning dispatch board. Spitfire Mechanic VB. Serial number AAR644. Destination Biggin Hill. Frontline fighter station on the Kent coast, 30 minutes from occupied France. It should be routine. She's delivered 14 Spitfires this month alone. But the briefing officer's tone is different today. Clipped, tense. Intelligence reports possible Luftwaffe activity over the channel. Reconnaissance flights, maybe more. If you see anything at all, abort and land at the nearest base. Clear? Mary nods. Clear. This is a delivery flight, Miss Ellis, not a combat mission. You are not equipped, trained, or authorized for engagement. Your job is to get that aircraft to Biggin Hill intact. If conditions deteriorate, put it down safely and wait for clearance. Translation: don't be a hero. You're just the delivery girl. She walks the pre-flight inspection alone. The Spitfire is pristine, factory fresh, still smelling of paint and engine oil. Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, 8303 Browning machine guns. All unloaded. No ammunition. Not a single round. ATA regulations. Ferry pilots fly unarmed. Always. The factory supervisor approaches, glancing nervously at the sky. "Miss Ellis, there's talk that the Jerrys hit a convoy off Margate this morning. Might be fighters, still in the area. You don't have to go right now. Wait an hour, see if it clears." Mary checks her watch. "Squadron needs this Spitfire. I'm already fueled and ready. You don't even have a radio." "I have a map and a compass. I'll be fine." Diary notation. Written later. He meant well. They all mean well. But wait and see is code for let a man do it. If I wait every time there's a risk, I'll never fly. 06:47 hours. She takes off. The Spitfire climbs beautifully, responsive, powerful, perfectly balanced. Mary settles into the rhythm, the familiar focus of flight. Altitude 8,000 feet. Heading southeast. Clear skies. For 12 minutes, it's perfect. Then she sees the smoke. Black columns rising from the coast. Not one source. Multiple. Ships burning. Oil fires on water. And above them, small dark shapes circling. Aircraft. Her chest tightens. She's too far to identify them, but they're not British. Wrong flight pattern. Wrong altitude discipline. Luftwaffe. Has to be. Standard procedure is immediate diversion. Land at the nearest base, report enemy activity. Wait for clearance. But the nearest base is 20 minutes behind her. Biggin Hill is 15 minutes ahead. And those fighters are between her and either option. Mary's internal monologue. Turn back. They'll say you panicked. Press on. You might not make it. But if you land short, you're proving them right. Proving women can't handle pressure. She pushes the throttle forward and drops to 4,000 feet, using cloud cover. Then the sky explodes. Flak bursts, black puffs of shrapnel blooming at her altitude. Ground batteries have opened up, which means the Luftwaffe is close. Too close. She banks hard left, diving through a gap in the clouds, and sees them. 3 Messerschmitt Bf-109s, 2,000 feet above, vectoring toward the coast. They haven't seen her yet. She's small, alone, not broadcasting, just another speck in a chaotic sky. Radio silence. No way to call for help. No weapons to defend herself. Just speed, altitude, and decisions measured in seconds. One of the 109s peels off, turning in her direction. Not attacking. Not yet. Investigating. Mary's hands are steady on the stick, but her heartbeat hammers in her ears. The Spitfire can outmaneuver a 109 in a dogfight, but she's not a combat pilot. She's never fired a gun in anger, never trained for evasion. The 109 closes to 800 yards. She shoves the stick forward and dives hard, nose down, full throttle, airspeed screaming past redline. The Messerschmitt follows. Flak bursts around her, British guns not distinguishing friend from foe in the chaos. She pulls up sharp, G-forces crushing her into the seat, vision tunneling. The 109 overshoots, climbing past her. She rolls inverted, dives again, leveling out at 500 feet above the channel. Breathing, controlled, deliberate. In, out, fly the plane. The 109 is gone. Lost her in the dive or gave up the chase. She doesn't look back. Ahead, through smoke and haze, the Kent coastline. And beyond it, Biggin Hill. She climbs back to 2,000 feet, hands still locked on the controls. Every second expecting bullets. Every second ready to evade. But the sky stays clear. 1,000 feet. 500 feet. Runway in sight. Mary Ellis drops the landing gear, bleeds off speed, and brings Spitfire AR-614 down in a textbook 3-point landing. She's shaking now. Only now. Not in the air. Never in the air. Ground crew rushes toward the plane, faces pale. One of them shouts, "Bloody hell, we told you to abort! There's Jerry's all over the channel!" Mary kills the engine, pulls off her leather helmet, and climbs out. Her voice is steady. "You needed a Spitfire. I brought you a Spitfire." Biggin Hill Airfield, 0714 hours. Perspective. Flight Lieutenant James Hargreaves, Operations Officer. The airfield is barely functional. A Luftwaffe raid 20 minutes ago left 2 Spitfires burning on the taxiway and punched craters across the eastern runway approach. Ground crews are still pulling wounded from a collapsed shelter. Hargreaves stands in the operations tower, binoculars scanning the sky, counting aircraft. 2 of his fighters are still up. 3 more are overdue, probably diverted or shot down. Then his radar operator calls out, "Single contact inbound, low altitude, bearing 270. Hargreaves swings his binoculars west. There, a Spitfire, coming in fast and low, just above the tree line. "That's not one of ours," someone mutters. "Wrong approach vector." Hargreaves checks the board. No scheduled returns from that direction. The Spitfire drops landing gear. Whoever's flying it knows what they're doing. Speed perfect, angle textbook, compensating for a slight crosswind. "Could be the delivery flight," the radar operator says. "Wasn't that due this morning?" Hargreaves lowers his binoculars. "The ATA flight? They'd have aborted hours ago. There's been Luftwaffe activity all over the channel." But the Spitfire is committed now, descending through wisps of smoke, still rising from burning fuel. On the ground, senior aircraft mechanic Dennis Wheeler watches the approach, shading his eyes against the morning sun. Interview, Dennis Wheeler, 1989. "I figured it was one of our boys coming back, shot up, maybe wounded. The way it came in, low, fast, no radio call, that's how you fly when you're hurt or your radio's gone. We were already running the ambulance onto the apron." The Spitfire touches down. Perfect 3-point landing. Rolls out a smooth tail wheel, kissing the tarmac, exactly as the mains settle. Not wounded, not damaged. Professional. Wheeler's crew moves toward the aircraft as it taxis to the dispersal point. Engine cuts. The propeller winds down. The canopy slides back, and a woman climbs out. Wheeler continued, "I stopped dead, we all did. For a second, I thought I was seeing things. Battle fatigue, maybe, because there's no way a woman just flew through that mess we'd been fighting through all morning." Mary Ellis pulls off her leather helmet, dark hair matted with sweat. She's pale but composed, moving with the deliberate steadiness of someone who won't allow herself to shake until she's alone. She drops to the tarmac, turns to the gathered ground crew, and says calmly, "Spitfire Mark VB. Serial AR614. Factory to frontline delivery. Where do you want her?" Silence. Not hostile, not dismissive. Stunned. Flight Lieutenant Hargreaves has descended from the tower. He approaches slowly, eyes moving from Mary to the Spitfire and back. "You came through from Birmingham?" "Yes, sir." "This morning? In the last hour?" "Yes, sir." His voice drops. "Miss, there were 3 Messerschmitts operating over your route. Flak batteries are active. We've had 2 pilots abort and 1 shot down in that corridor since dawn." Mary meets his eyes. "I saw them." Evaded and pressed on. "The squadron needs aircraft." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Pilot Officer Robert Crawford, a combat veteran with 11 kills and a distinguished Flying Cross, steps forward from the group of pilots who've gathered to watch. Crawford, interview excerpt 1987. "I'd been in 3 dogfights that week. Lost my wingman 2 days prior. I was exhausted, angry, and frankly not in the mood for whatever stunt this was. But then I looked at her eyes, and I recognized something. The look you get after you've been properly scared and pushed through it anyway. She'd just done what half my squadron couldn't do that morning. Fly through a hot zone and land clean." Crawford extends his hand. "That took nerve." Mary shakes it. Firm grip. Just doing my job. Your job is delivery, not combat flying. I delivered, didn't I? A laugh ripples through the gathered pilots and crew, not mocking, genuine. Hargreaves steps closer, studying the Spitfire. Not a scratch, not a dent. Fuel gauge shows she burned it down to fumes, but the aircraft is pristine. He turns back to Mary. Your ATA? Yes, sir. And you flew this unarmed? ATA regulations. Ferry pilots don't carry ammunition. Hargreaves looks at Crawford, then back at Mary. When he speaks, his voice carries a tone she's never heard directed at her before. Not condescension, not surprising. Respect. Miss Ellis, I've had decorated combat pilots turn back from easier runs today. I don't know whether you're fearless or insane, but you've just delivered a fighter this squadron desperately needs, under conditions most men wouldn't accept. Mary nods once professionally. Will there be anything else, sir? I need to arrange transport back to base. Hargreaves actually smiles. Transport's already being arranged. But first, you're coming to a mess. Anyone who flies through hell to bring me a Spitfire earns at least a cup of tea and a proper debrief. As they walk toward the operations building, Dennis Wheeler calls after them. Ma'am, that was the finest landing I've seen all week, and I've seen a lot of landings. Mary turns, allows herself the smallest smile. Thank you. She's a good aircraft. Take care of her. Wheeler, final reflection. After she left, we all just stood there for a minute. Nobody said it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. We'd been wrong. Dead wrong. About what women could do. About who could handle pressure. That girl had more guts than half the men I'd served with, and she did it without firing a shot. Mary Ellis returned to ATA headquarters at White Waltham that evening, expecting a debriefing. What she got was a 2-minute conversation with her commanding officer, Pauline Gower. I heard about Biggin Hill. Are you all right? Yes, ma'am. Good. You're scheduled for a mosquito delivery tomorrow, 0800 hours. Don't be late. That was it. Her flight log for June 18, 1942, reads simply, Spitfire Mech VB AR-614, Castle Bromwich to Biggin Hill, delivered under fire. 10 words. For 47 minutes that should have earned a citation. No medal, no commendation, no press coverage. If a male RAF pilot had done what Mary did, flown unarmed through active enemy airspace, evaded Luftwaffe fighters, and delivered a critical aircraft to a frontline squadron under attack, he'd have been mentioned in dispatches at minimum, possibly awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross. But Mary Ellis was ATA, civilian, auxiliary, and worse, a woman. Official Air Ministry Memo, July 1942 regarding ATA recognition. While the contributions of air transport auxiliary personnel are valued, their role remains non-combatant and support-oriented. Decorations for gallantry are reserved for personnel engaged in operations against the enemy. Ferry pilots, regardless of circumstances encountered, do not meet this criterion. Translation: what Mary did doesn't count because she wasn't supposed to be in danger in the first place. But word spread anyway. Not through official channels, through the network of pilots, ground crews, and mechanics who'd been at Biggin Hill that morning. In ready rooms across RAF Fighter Command, the story circulated. The woman who flew through a Luftwaffe raid unarmed. The ATA pilot who did what half the combat squadron couldn't. Squadron leader Anthony Bartley, 92 Squadron. Diary entry. June 1942. I heard the most extraordinary story today. One of the ATA girls, Ellis, I think, delivered a Spit to Biggin Hill during the morning raid. No guns, no radio, Jerry fighters in the area. Hargreaves swears it's true. He said she landed like she'd just come from a Sunday flight, cool as ice. Makes one wonder what else we've gotten wrong about women and pressure. At a senior RAF staff meeting in July, An officer from Fighter Command mentioned the incident, not to praise Mary, but to argue that ATA pilots were taking unnecessary risks. Air Vice Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory's response, recorded in meeting minutes. If this pilot violated standing orders to avoid danger, that's a disciplinary matter for ATA Command, not a cause for celebration. Ferry pilots, male or female, are not combat personnel and should not behave as such. But then Air Commodore Cecil Boutier, who'd been at Biggin Hill and reviewed the flight personally, interjected, "With respect, sir, this pilot didn't seek danger. She flew into a tactical situation that developed after takeoff and made the judgment call that pressing forward was safer than turning back. She was correct, and she displayed nerves that, frankly, some of our combat pilots lack." The meeting moved on. No formal action was taken, but Boutier's words leaked, and they stuck. She had the nerves of 10 men. The phrase appears in at least 4 separate personal accounts from RAF personnel who served in 1942-43. It became shorthand, a quiet acknowledgement among those who knew. Mary herself never spoke publicly about the flight during the war. ATA policy discouraged press attention, and Mary had no interest in becoming a symbol. Letter to her sister, August 1942. You asked if I received any recognition for that flight. I assume someone's been talking. The answer is no, and I don't need it. Recognition implies I did something extraordinary. I did my job. The fact that people find it extraordinary when a woman does her job competently is the problem, not something to celebrate. But the absence of official recognition stung others on her behalf. Flight Lieutenant Hargreaves wrote a personal letter to ATA Command recommending Mary for commendation. It was acknowledged and filed. Nothing came of it. Pilot Officer Crawford mentioned Mary's flight in his own post-war memoir, published in 1953. I flew 147 combat missions. I have a DFC and a bar. But the gutsiest thing I saw in the entire war was an unarmed woman flying a Spitfire through a fighter corridor, and landing without a scratch. Her name was Mary Ellis, and the RAF never gave her a bloody thing for it. Even decades later, the institutional response remained dismissive. When historians began researching ATA contributions in the 1970s, they found Mary's flight mentioned in exactly 3 official documents. 1. Her personal flight log. 2. The Biggin Hill Aircraft Receipt Ledger. Spitfire AR-614, received 18 June 1942. 3. An ATA incident report noting, delivery completed despite deteriorating tactical conditions. No operational reports, no intelligence assessments, no recognition whatsoever that something remarkable had occurred. The bureaucracy had done what bureaucracies do, reduced courage to paperwork, bravery to a logistics entry. But among the people who were there, the pilots who couldn't believe she'd made it, the ground crew who watched her land, the operations officer who saw the steady calm in her eyes, the memory didn't fade. Dennis Wheeler, final interview, 1989. I served 4 years. I saw incredible things, heroic things. But that morning, watching that young woman climb out of that Spitfire like it was just another Tuesday, that changed something in me. I stopped making assumptions about who could do what. And I made damn sure my daughters knew that story. Mary Ellis flew 1,000 more aircraft during the war. 76 different types, including 4 engine bombers and experimental jets. She never received a medal, but she kept flying. November 1945. The war is over. The Air Transport Auxiliary is dissolved. 174 women had served. They delivered 308,567 aircraft of 147 different types. Fighters, bombers, experimental jets, from Tiger Moths to 4-engine Lancasters. 13 had died in service. Crashes, weather, mechanical failure. None were killed by enemy action, though many, like Mary Ellis, had flown through it. On demobilization, each woman received a certificate of service and a handshake. No veterans' benefits, no military pension, no formal recognition. They handed back their uniforms, packed their flight logs, and went home. And Britain forgot them. Lettice Curtis, ATA pilot, interview 1982. It was like we'd never existed. The war memorials listed RAF pilots, ground crew, everyone, but not us. We weren't military, you see. We were auxiliary. We'd flown the same aircraft, faced the same risks, lost friends the same way. But because we weren't in uniform, we didn't count. Mary Ellis returned to her family's farm. She became a ferry pilot again, commercial aircraft this time, flying executives and cargo across Europe. She never spoke publicly about the war. When people asked, she'd say simply, "I moved planes, that's all." For 30 years, the ATA women existed only in their own memories and privately kept flight logs. History books mentioned them in passing, if at all. A footnote: women also served in non-combat ferry roles. The photographs gathered dust in archives. Women in flight suits, smiling beside Spitfires. Women studying maps. Women climbing into cockpits of aircraft the RAF had sworn they couldn't handle. Then, in the late 1970s, historians began looking closer. Researcher Giles Whittell was examining RAF logistics records when he found something strange. Delivery logs showing thousands of aircraft movements with civilian signatures. Women's names, hundreds of them. Whittell, 2012 interview. I started cross-referencing, and the numbers were staggering. These women had flown everything, and their safety record was better than the RAF's own ferry pilots. But nobody knew. Nobody had written about it. They'd been completely erased from the narrative. The rediscovery began slowly. A BBC documentary in 1979, a few newspaper articles, interviews with surviving ATA women, now in their 60s and 70s. The archival footage emerged. Black and white film of women doing pre-flight checks on hurricanes, climbing into Lancaster cockpits, walking away from landed Spitfires, helmets under their arms, smiling. They didn't fight in combat, but they faced death every time they took off. Weather systems that could kill in minutes. Aircraft with mechanical quirks they had to learn on the fly. No radios, no navigation aids beyond a map and compass. And sometimes, enemy fighters. Mary Ellis, rare interview, 1990. People say we were brave. We weren't. We were pilots. There was a job that needed doing, and we could do it. The brave thing would have been refusing to fly because someone said women couldn't. We just proved them wrong, one flight at a time. By the 1990s, formal recognition finally began. Memorial plaques, museum exhibitions, academic studies documenting ATA contributions. In 2008, the British government awarded the ATA veterans a special commemorative badge, 63 years later. Many recipients were in their 90s. Many more had already died. Mary Ellis lived to 101. She flew until she was 90, accumulating over 11,000 flight hours across her life. When she died in 2018, her obituary finally told the full story. The woman who delivered over 1,000 aircraft during the war, including the flight through enemy fire that the RAF never officially acknowledged. The BBC called her Britain's forgotten heroine. But to those who knew, she was never forgotten. The pilots at Biggin Hill in 1942 remembered. The ground crews who watched her land remembered. The women who flew beside her in the ATA remembered. And now, finally, history remembers too. Archival narration over footage of elderly ATA women at a reunion, 2005. They were told they weren't strong enough, weren't skilled enough, weren't brave enough. So they climbed into Spitfires and proved the world wrong. Not with words, with wings. When they said women couldn't handle pressure, Mary Ellis climbed into a Spitfire and flew through hell to prove them wrong. Not because she wanted to be a hero, because she wanted to be a pilot. Montage begins. Black and white photograph of Mary Ellis in her ATA uniform, standing beside a Spitfire, 1942. The memo that circulated through RAF command in 1942 said, women lacked the nerves for combat flying, that they'd panic under fire, that they couldn't be trusted with fighters in dangerous conditions. Mary Ellis's flight log entry from June 18, 1942, delivered Spitfire under fire, is the only rebuttal that mattered. 10 words that demolished decades of institutional prejudice. Archival footage. ATA women walking across an airfield, carrying parachutes and flight gear. She wasn't alone. 174 women flew for the Air Transport Auxiliary. They delivered over 308,000 aircraft. They mastered 147 different types, more variety than most RAF pilots would fly in their entire careers. They did it without fanfare, without recognition, without asking permission. Photograph, group shot of ATA women pilots, smiling, arms linked, standing in front of a hurricane. They weren't looking for glory. They were looking for freedom, in the sky and in history. The freedom to be judged by their skill, not their gender. The freedom to prove that courage has no uniform, no rank, and no chromosome requirement. The freedom to fly. Interview footage. Elderly ATA veteran, 1995, hands folded, eyes distant with memory voiceover. ATA pilot Margaret Frost, age 91. We didn't think we were doing anything extraordinary. We were just doing what needed to be done. But I suppose that's what all pioneers think. You don't set out to change the world. You just refuse to accept the limits someone else put on you. Mary Ellis flew 1,000 aircraft during the war. She never received a medal. But in 2018, when she died at 101, fighter jets flew over her funeral in formation, the tribute the RAF never gave her in life. Footage. Modern RAF Spitfire flying over English countryside. The young women flying those jets, women who now serve as combat pilots in the RAF, flying missions Mary's generation was told they could never handle, are her legacy. Memorial plaque, Maidenhead, England. In memory of the Air Transport Auxiliary 1940-1945, they flew without fear, they served without recognition. They proved that courage knows no gender. Every time a woman climbs into a fighter cockpit today, she's walking a path cleared by Mary Ellis and the ATA women who refuse to believe the word impossible. They didn't have guns. They didn't have glory. They didn't have recognition. But they had skill. They had courage. And they had something the RAF couldn't take away: the sky. Final image, Mary Ellis, age 100, sitting in a Spitfire cockpit during a commemoration event 2017, wearing her original ATA wings, eyes bright voiceover. Mary Ellis' final interview before her death. They asked me once if I ever felt afraid. Of course I did. Every pilot who says they've never been afraid is either lying or hasn't flown enough. But fear isn't the absence of courage. Courage is flying anyway, doing the job that needs doing, even when the world tells you you're not capable, even when the sky is full of flak and the odds are against you. She pauses, smiles slightly. I proved I could fly. That's all I ever wanted. The rest, the recognition, the memorials, the history books, that came later. Too late for many of us, but it came. And now, finally, people know. We were there. We flew. We mattered. The RAF said women couldn't fly fighters. Mary Ellis didn't argue. She just took off, and when she landed, unarmed, untrained for combat, unshaken, she didn't need to say a word. The Spitfire spoke for her. The Air Transport Auxiliary flew 308 of 567 aircraft during World War II. 174 women served. 13 gave their lives. For 30 years, history forgot them. We won't. This is the story of the women who didn't wait for permission, who didn't wait for recognition, who didn't wait for the world to change. They changed it themselves, one flight at a time. They proved that barriers aren't broken with arguments. They're broken with wings. Final image: silhouette of a Spitfire against a sunset sky. And once you've proven you can fly, no one can ever take the sky away from you. If you want to make sure stories like Mary's don't stay forgotten, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling us whose forgotten story should we tell next. Because history isn't just what we remember, it's what we refuse to forget. When they said women couldn't handle pressure, Mary Ellis climbed into a Spitfire and flew through hell to prove them wrong. Not for glory, not for recognition, because it was her job, and she refused to believe she couldn't do it. Montage: black and white photograph of Mary in ATA uniform beside a Spitfire, 1942. That single flight on June 18, 1942, the one the RAF never officially acknowledged, demolished decades of institutional prejudice with 10 words in a logbook. Delivered Spitfire under fire. Archival footage: ATA women walking across an airfield, carrying flight gear. She wasn't alone. 174 women flew for the Air Transport Auxiliary. They delivered over 308,000 aircraft. They mastered more aircraft types than most decorated pilots would fly in their entire careers. They did it without asking permission, without waiting for approval, without needing anyone to tell them they were capable. Photograph: group of ATA women, arms linked, smiling in front of a hurricane. They weren't looking for glory. They were looking for freedom, in the sky and in history. The freedom to be judged by skill, not gender. The freedom to prove that courage doesn't require a uniform, a rank, or a Y chromosome. The freedom to fly. Interview footage: elderly Margaret Frost, 1995 voiceover. Margaret Frost, age 91. We didn't think we were doing anything extraordinary. We were doing what needed to be done. But I suppose that's what all pioneers think. You don't set out to change the world. You just refuse to accept the limits someone else puts on you. Mary Ellis flew 1,000 aircraft during the war. She never received a medal, but when she died in 2018, RAF fighter jets flew over her funeral in formation. The honor the service never gave her in life. Footage: modern RAF Spitfire flying over English countryside. The young women piloting those jets today, women who now serve as combat pilots in the RAF, flying the missions Mary's generation was told they could never handle. They are her living legacy. Memorial plaque: in memory of the Air Transport Auxiliary. They flew without fear. They served without recognition. They proved courage knows no gender. Every time a woman climbs into a fighter cockpit, she walks a path cleared by Mary Ellis and 173 others who refused the word impossible. They didn't have guns. They didn't have glory. But they had skill, courage, and something no one could take away: the sky. Final image: Mary Ellis at age 100, sitting in Spitfire cockpit, 27th, wearing her ATA wings. Voiceover: Mary's final interview. People ask if I was ever afraid. Of course I was. Every pilot who says they've never been afraid is lying or hasn't flown enough. But fear isn't the absence of courage. Courage is flying anyway, doing what needs doing, even when the world says you can't. She smiles. I proved I could fly. That's all I ever wanted. The recognition came later. Too late for many of us, but it came. And now people know. We were there. We flew. We mattered. The RAF said women couldn't fly fighters. Mary Ellis didn't argue. She just took off. And when she landed, unarmed, unescorted, unshaken, she didn't need words. The Spitfire spoke for her. Text on screen. The Air Transport Auxiliary delivered 308,567 aircraft during World War II. 174 women served. 13 gave their lives. For 30 years, history forgot them. We won't. This is the story of women who didn't wait for permission, who didn't wait for recognition, who didn't wait for the world to change. They changed it themselves, one flight at a time. They proved that barriers aren't broken with arguments. They're broken with wings. Silhouette of Spitfire against sunset. And once you've proven you can fly, no one can ever take the sky away from you. If stories like Mary's matter to you, subscribe and share this. Comment below, whose forgotten story should we tell next? Because history isn't just what we remember, it's what we refuse to forget.